They say there is no pain greater than watching your own flesh and blood sitting across from you in a courtroom. But I, Harold Benton, have lived through that. I once believed that the one who betrayed me was my son-in-law. However, it turned out that the signature on the betrayal contract bore my own last name. After 30 years in the insurance business, I thought I understood people, the value of trust, and the weight of a promise. Yet I was turned into a stranger by my own blood, in the very house whose bricks were laid by my hands. If you think truth only exists in law books, this story will make you believe that real justice begins with a father's love and integrity. Before we begin, hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and tell me where you're listening from, because somewhere out there, another father might be fighting in silence to protect the simplest thing of all: the truth. The afternoon in Savannah smelled of salt and jasmine. The last light of the day filtered through moss-covered oaks, stretching across the red brick path leading to number 27 Wilmington River Road, the house I once thought was the greatest gift I could ever give my daughter. Today it was the place where my daughter threw me out, with the same voice that 20 years ago begged me not to leave her mother's hospital room. "Go, or I'll call the police." The words came out dry and sharp as a blade, slicing through every memory I had of the little girl who once called me Daddy. I stood on the steps, watching Melanie's shoulders tremble. She clutched her phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The river breeze stirred the curtains, mixing the smell of fresh coffee with lilac in the hallway. I wanted to say something, anything, but nothing passed my throat. "Do you really want to do this?" I asked. "Yes. You're making things worse. Derek doesn't need you meddling." I looked at her, searching for a trace of reason in those eyes, but found only confusion and anger. I smiled, the kind of smile that comes when a man knows words are useless. I turned and stepped down the 3 brick stairs. Beneath my feet, the old bricks I had laid with my own hands were cracked by time. I pulled the old phone from my coat pocket and called Matthew Collins, the broker who had helped me close the deal on this house 3 years earlier. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Harold, long time no hear. I need to see you. It's about the house on Wilmington River." A pause. "I'm guessing something's wrong. Tonight, if possible. I'll drive to your office." I hung up. On the porch, Melanie still stood there, phone raised but not dialing. The sunset glowed on her blonde hair, turning it to fire. I looked at her one last time and said, loud enough for her to hear, "If you want to lose this house that badly, I'll help you." I didn't shout, I just said it. But the air around us turned heavy. The road home ran through the old downtown, past red brick buildings and palm trees, the early lights of cafes glowing. The river wind drifted into the cabin, carrying its weary salt. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, but my mind slipped back 12 years, to the day Melanie called me in the rain, saying Derek was the best man in the world. I hadn't argued, only told her, "Fine, as long as you choose a man who keeps a roof over your head." Now that man had turned the house into an online casino, and my daughter, out of love, had become the gatekeeper who threw her father out like a trespasser. When the car turned onto Whitaker, I saw my reflection in the mirror. Gray hair, dark circles, a worn coat dusted with paperwork from the office where I still advised a few old clients on life insurance just to keep my mind from rusting. I'd spent a lifetime at a desk explaining risk, helping people secure their futures. Yet the hardest risk to insure was my own family. My small house in Old Fort sat about 5 miles from the river. As I entered, the familiar silence of a man living alone surrounded me. The pendulum clock struck 7, echoing through the room. I dropped my keys into the wooden bowl Melanie had made in high school shop class, its corner now chipped. I switched on the light and sat at the oak desk, where my files were neatly arranged in a leather briefcase. 30 years of discipline and planning, what Derek called old-fashioned. I pulled a thick envelope from my coat pocket, opened it, printed statements, lines of debt under Derek Sloan's name. At the bottom, the words, secured by property. 27 Wilmington River Ard, burned into my eyes. I hadn't gotten these out of curiosity, but from my own credit alert system. As a co-signer, every change came to me. The first notice arrived last week from First Savannah Bank, a second loan, a home equity line, of $61,000, opened without my signature. I had called politely to ask about the mistake, but the bank clerk, a young woman with a shaky voice, whispered, "Mr. Benton, the file has your e-signature, but it doesn't match the sample on record." That was the moment I knew things had slipped past morality. I stacked the papers and took a deep breath, the scent of old wood mixed with oranges from the backyard. On the wall, the clock my late wife once chose ticked steadily, as if to remind me that everything has an expiration date, even trust. I rose, opened the wooden cabinet, and found the tube containing the deed copy Melanie once signed. Under the lamp, the black ink lines remained sharp. At the bottom were the notary seal and our names, Harold Benton beside my daughter's. The clause read, "Tenants in common, 50-50 ownership." Right below, "Any future liens require the consent of both owners." I smiled faintly. 30 years in insurance taught me that every risk hides in the fine print. People just rarely read it. I put the deed back and took out an old business card from Jonathan Hale, a lawyer I'd met at a seminar on estate management for retirees. Embossed words read, "Property law and civil remedies." I stared at the number, thought for a moment, then set it down. Not yet. I wanted to sleep one more night before turning fatherhood into litigation. Before switching off the light, I looked out the window. The river outside was black as glass, the moon casting a silver streak. A cargo ship crept beneath the Talmadge Bridge, moving slow and heavy, like time itself, indifferent to human emotion. I told myself, tomorrow won't be about pleading. Tomorrow I will act not as a father insulted, but as a co-owner defending his property. And maybe, starting tomorrow, Melanie will learn that some mistakes can't be washed away with tears, only repaid with assets. The wind from the river carried the scent of rust and salt. I closed the door, glanced once more at the chipped wooden bowl, and thought I could almost hear the faintest sound in life, the foundation beginning to crack. The next morning, Savannah lay in fog. I woke early as always, brewed a strong pot of coffee, and set it beside the neatly stacked files from the night before. On the table, a sheet bearing the first Savannah. Bank logo sat in the center, a faint coffee ring on its corner. I looked at the figure, $61,000. Small to the wealthy, but to me it was 3 years of retirement and 10,000 hours of insurance consultations combined. After 3 decades in the field, you learn to see risk not in numbers, but in people. And Derek, my son-in-law, was the kind of risk no company would underwrite. I opened my laptop and logged into my credit alert account. 3 new notifications overnight. A credit card request for $15,000, an unapproved personal loan, and a pending verification tied to the homeowner's insurance on 27 Wilmington River. I clicked the last one. On the screen, policy modification, pending signature. Derek's name appeared beside it. I leaned back, gripping my coffee. The man wasn't just mortgaging the house. He was about to cancel the insurance policy I'd written myself, the one protecting the property against natural and legal risks. I'd handled that policy personally because I didn't trust any agent to understand Riverside exposure clauses, and now it was about to be undone by someone who knew nothing beyond digital roulette. I let out a dry laugh. My own voice echoed through the empty kitchen. I'd taught hundreds of clients how to manage risk, read fine print, and prepare for the future. I never imagined I'd need to use those lessons against my own family. The landline rang, its old tone filling the room. I picked up. "Good morning, Mr. Benton," Matthew Collins said, calm but crisp. "I reviewed the Wilmington file. The market's up. What do you want to do with the property?" "I need a new appraisal," said. as soon as possible. Sure, but may I ask, is this business or personal? Both. I paused. And I want an honest valuation, not one that flatters the client. He hesitated, then nodded. Understood. I'll take photos and measurements this afternoon. Report within 24 hours. I hung up. Just as expected, the first reaction came from Derek. I didn't wait long. 10 minutes later, my cell phone rang, Melanie's number. I hesitated before answering. Dad, her voice cracked. Derek says you called Matthew to sell the house? What are you doing? I kept my tone even. Tell him not to worry. I'm only protecting my asset. Your asset? That's my house. No, Melanie. That's our house, at least until the law says otherwise. On the other end of the line, I heard quickened breathing, then Derek's voice breaking through, sharp and angry. Give me the phone, he shouted. Who do you think you are, interfering like this? I'm warning you, this is harassment. I laughed, a short, dry burst. Derek, I've sold insurance for 30 years. I know the difference between harassment and risk prevention. You're playing with fire. Go ahead and try, old man, he snapped, then hung up. I sat there listening to the steady beeping, then slowly placed the phone down. On the table lay a mess of documents, loan agreements, account statements, photocopies of the mortgage contract. Every one of them carried his signature. I turned each page, stapled them together, and slipped them into a brown file folder. At the corner of the desk, I noticed my old business card case. One card had slid out, Jonathan Hale, property attorney. I picked up the phone and dialed the number printed on it. A deep, steady male voice answered, Office of Jonathan Hale. This is he. I need to meet about a co-owned property issue. Of course, Mr. Benton. Are you available this afternoon? 3:00. Perfect. Bring all original documents. I hung up, sat for a few minutes, then let out a chuckle. Everything was unfolding exactly like an insurance claim, a sequence of events triggering a coverage clause. I'd written thousands of policies like that, and now I was the claimant. At noon, I drove downtown and stopped at a cafe by the river where I used to meet clients. The place hadn't changed. Oak tables, the hum of a grinder, the smell of waffles in the air. I took a seat by the window, opened my old notebook, and wrote the first line. Family risk when trust is mispriced. Then I outlined my plan. 1. Property appraisal. 2. Meet the attorney. 3. Verify co-ownership rights. 4. Confirm unauthorized loans. 5. Prepare response strategy. Once written, my mind settled into its old rhythm. Clear, logical, the way it used to be when I sat with clients drafting wills. By 4, I was at Jonathan Hale's office, a glass building near Johnson Square. He was around 50, in a gray suit, calm voice, sharp eyes, the kind of man used to divorces and land disputes. You said you co-own the house with your daughter? Yes, 50-50. I'm a co-signer on the loan, and there's a clause forbidding any mortgage without my consent. Jonathan examined the papers and nodded. Valid contract. If they borrowed further without your signature, that's a serious breach. Do you plan to file a bank complaint? Not yet. I want to secure my share before things blow up. He smiled slightly. There's a way. Partition action, split, or forced sale. But before that, I recommend sending a notice of dispute, a polite way to make them understand you're not bluffing. I nodded. Draft it. I'll sign. When I left the office, the sun had set. The light reflecting off the glass doors was the color of tarnished copper. I stood there for a moment, seeing my reflection merge with the cityscape, and whispered, All right, Melanie. From now on, I won't speak as a father. I'll speak the language of contracts. In the distance, church bells rang 8 slow notes, echoing softly. I walked away, steady, like a man who had just signed a new policy, only this time the insured was his own dignity. On Tuesday morning, the Savannah sky hung low and gray like a steel sheet. I sat in my small office, once the home of Harold Benton and Associates Life Insurance, now just a tidy room with file shelves, an old computer, and the scent of paper. On my desk, the draft email from Jonathan Hale glowed on the screen. Notice of dispute. The opening line made me smile. This is to formally notify all parties of a co-owner's objection to unauthorized encumbrance of jointly held property. I took a sip of black coffee, its bitterness tracing down my throat. Each word struck like a small hammer, measured and cold. No more dad, no more old man, no tears or arguments, only letters, law, and rights. I printed 3 copies, signed them, and sealed them in thick envelopes. One for the bank, one for the lawyer, one for Melanie. I knew the look she'd give when reading it, a mix of fear and fury, but it didn't matter. In insurance, I'd seen hundreds of people only believe once the consequences were printed in ink. I placed the documents in my leather case and drove out. Barnard Street still glistened with dew, shop lights just opening. I stopped at the post office and mailed the letters by certified delivery. As the stamp pressed down, I felt as though I'd signed another insurance policy, except this time the beneficiary was the principal itself. At noon, I called Matthew Collins to ask about the appraisal. "Just finished," he said. "Good news, Mr. Benton. $462,000. That area's booming." "And the outstanding loans?" "Roughly 200 now, or 88 plus 61,000 in secondary debt. If they sell now, after fees, you'd still net a healthy gain." I noted it carefully. "Thanks, Matthew. Send me the PDF. My attorney will need it." "Sounds like something big's happening, sir?" he asked. "Big indeed," I said and hung up. I spent the afternoon reviewing every document, each signature, each clause. Years in insurance taught me that one detail can save an entire asset. Near the bottom of page 14 of the mortgage, I spotted it. All parties shall be equally notified in case of default, refinancing, or legal action. I straightened in my chair, smiling slowly. That meant if Derek or Melanie missed a payment, the bank must alert me before any enforcement. I drafted a short email to Hale. "Jonathan, check clause 14 on default. It could be grounds to open a partition case if they react badly. I suspect they'll miss this payment." After sending, I stood by the window. The wind from the river carried moisture and the distant horn of a ship. I thought back to my early years, knocking door to door, explaining the value of long-term protection. Many laughed, many refused, but I never left without handing out my card. I believed in numbers, signatures, obligations. People could betray, but contracts could not. At 7 that evening, the phone rang. Melanie flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice shook. "Dad, I got the letter." "Good. Read it carefully." "You're turning this into hate. Derek says you're trying to take the house. I'm taking nothing. I'm keeping my share. You said the house was a wedding gift. And gifts come with conditions, that it be cared for with respect. Derek broke that." I heard her breathing hard, then a soft sob. "Dad, Derek lost his job. He just wanted a temporary loan. I didn't know." I paused, then said slowly, "Have you ever wondered why I always told you to read your insurance policy before signing? Because you never see risk until it swallows you." "Stop talking like that," she cried. "I'm exhausted." "Then rest, my girl. I'll handle the rest." I hung up, not out of anger, but because I knew advice now was like a pin striking dry wood. It wouldn't sink in. As night fell, I poured another coffee, turned on the desk lamp, and rearranged the files. On the wall, my top regional insurance advisor 2004 plaque glowed in the yellow light. I chuckled softly. I'd spent a lifetime preventing others' financial mistakes, yet couldn't stop my own child from making one. At exactly 9, the phone rang again. Jonathan Hale. "Mr. Benton, I reviewed the clause you mentioned. Excellent. It lets us issue a pre-default notice and ask the bank to freeze all related activity. Consider the property temporarily sealed." "Good," I said. "Do it now. I'll send the letter to First Savannah first thing tomorrow, but brace yourself, they'll react strongly." "I'm used to reactions." 30 years in this business. I've seen every emotion except gratitude. Jonathan chuckled softly. You sound ready for battle. I don't call it battle, I said, my tone low. I call it a lesson. After the call, I sat still for a long time. Outside, rain began tapping against the metal roof. Through the window, I saw the riverfront lights flicker on the water. A flash of lightning lit up the room for a heartbeat, catching the photo of young Melanie, sweaty hair, clutching the wooden doll I carved for her. I brushed my fingers along the frame's edge, hearing the rain grow heavier, and understood that this storm had only just begun. The next morning, Savannah was gray as cold steel. I rose early, brewed black coffee, and sat at my desk, where the sealed files from last night waited. The air still carried the memory of rain, the scent of damp wood, old paper, and hot coffee. On the computer, Jonathan Hale's email had arrived on schedule. A scanned letter to the bank. Official notice to suspend all transactions tied to disputed co-ownership. I opened the file, reading line by line. The final sentence made me nod slightly. All financial institutions involved are hereby instructed to temporarily halt any loans, withdrawals, or refinancing actions related to the aforementioned property without written consent from co-owner Harold Benton. Everything was now bound by law. The bank could no longer aid Derek. I printed, signed, and faxed a copy. As the machine hummed, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in weeks. This was the feeling I used to promise clients peace of mind, born from locking the door against risk. But I also knew, every time you lock one door, someone will try to break another. And Derek was not the kind to fail quietly. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the landline rang, an unknown number flashing. I picked up and heard, Mr. Benton, this is Catherine Lowe, credit representative from First Savannah Bank. I'm calling to confirm we received the letter from Hale's law office. However, she hesitated. Another party just attempted to submit a withdrawal before the freeze order fully processed. We've held it, but I thought you should know. Name? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Derek Sloan. I closed my eyes and breathed in. Thank you, Catherine. You did the right thing. I'm truly sorry, Mr. Benton, but he's furious. He's shouting in the lobby, saying you're destroying his family. Don't worry, he destroyed that family long ago. I hung up and sat in silence for a few minutes. Outside, sunlight began cutting through the clouds, laying a stripe across my desk and lighting the corner of the frame, holding Melanie's childhood photo. I looked at that small face and suddenly remembered the time she sat in my office, legs swinging, asking, Dad, why do people buy such sad insurance? I used to laugh and answer, because no one believes disaster will happen until it knocks on their door. And now it was knocking. At noon, I received an email from Jonathan. Mr. Benton, the bank confirms the account freeze succeeded. However, be prepared. They'll hire counsel to respond. I advise avoiding direct contact with Derek and Melanie for now. I replied briefly, not worried. 30 years of insurance taught me how to keep a distance from unstable clients. At 2 in the afternoon, there was a knock. I froze for a moment. Who comes to my house on a weekday? A glance through the window. Derek, rumpled shirt, an envelope in his hand, moving fast and furious. I opened the door a crack and left the chain on. What do you want? I asked evenly. I came to talk. His voice was hoarse, tinged with alcohol. You've said enough, Derek. You ruined everything. The house, my wife, my life. Can't you see? You only know control like those damned contracts you sell. I kept silent, looking straight into his eyes. You don't need me to ruin anything, Derek. You've done that yourself. You don't understand, he shouted. I just needed more time, a few weeks. I was about to win it back. Win what? In a game where you've wagered the roof over your head? Derek paused, then let out a shaky, bitter laugh. You think you're smart because you have papers, but paper has no heart. And you have a heart with no mind. He shoved the envelope through the crack, nearly popping the chain. "This is so you can see what you've caused." I watched him stagger down the brick path and drive off, then picked up the envelope. Inside were statements, Melanie's account. I saw credit card payments, small transfers to Play Online LLC, and a handwritten note. Rent advance, $2,400. I understood. Melanie was carrying her husband's debt. Sweat pricked my forehead. Even in the insurance trade, my heart sank. You can price the probability of accidents, but never the blindness of love. I dialed Jonathan Hale. "Hale, if I want to protect my share of the property from Melanie's debts, what do I do?" "I'll file a partition preliminary this afternoon," he said. "Think of it as a temporary fence around your ownership. No one touches it." "Do it," I said. "And Jonathan?" "Yes?" "Don't send them a copy. Let the court notify." "You're going straight at them?" "Yes. I've watched hundreds lose everything by signing too late. I won't repeat it." As I hung up, heavy rain broke outside. Thunder rolled toward the river, flickering light across the glass. I sat at my desk, opened the drawer, and took out the old client ledger. Every page was a story. A father buying coverage for a child. A wife gripping a policy at her husband's funeral. I once believed each memory proved that preparation works. Today I learned, sometimes, preparation can't save people from themselves. I wrote, on the last page, April 12th, partition initiated. The first storm officially arrives. I closed the book and listened to the steady drum on the roof. In that moment, I knew the coming storm wouldn't stay outside. 3 days later, Savannah was startlingly clear. Cool air, river wind carrying salt and jasmine from the wild shrubs along the fence. I sat on the porch with coffee in hand, watching the flag snap in the early sun. On the table lay a fresh packet from Jonathan, court copies confirming the preliminary partition had been accepted and stamped by a Chatham County judge. Beneath the cold legal text was a raised red seal, dry and beautiful enough to let my chest unclench. Paper has a strange power. It knows no anger or mercy, but it forces truth to stand upright. I read the order closely. Pending final judgment, no party shall transact, transfer, refinance, or possess the property in excess of their legally recognized interest. Translation: Derek couldn't touch a single brick. I called Jonathan. "I just received the stamped copy," I said. "Good. Now we wait for their response. Could be weeks, could be months, but the house is locked." "Thank you, Jonathan. I owe you a lot." "You don't owe anyone, Harold. You're simply reclaiming what's fair." I smiled lightly. "Sounds like what I used to tell clients signing life insurance." "And you know," Jonathan said, "most only understand that line after they've lost everything." I was quiet, then murmured, "I understand now." After the call, I drove downtown to meet Catherine Lowe, the banker who'd stopped the withdrawal. I wanted to thank her in person. The cafe sat near Wright Square among moss-draped oaks. Catherine arrived on time, younger than I expected, about 30, sharp-eyed and measured. "I'm glad the bank followed the process," I said. "I'm glad you acted in time," she replied. Honestly, a few hours later, and that withdrawal might have cleared. I nodded and exhaled. "Thank you, Catherine. Without you, that house might have slipped from my hands." "Truthfully, Mr. Benton," she tilted her head, "you're the calmest person I've seen while nearly losing a home." I smiled. "Occupational reflex. After 30 years in insurance, I learned panic saves no one. It only gets contracts signed wrong." She chuckled, setting down her cappuccino. "And your family? Do they know yet?" "They do," I said, eyes dimming. "My daughter is torn between loyalty and truth. I don't blame her. I just want her to see consequences with her own eyes." Catherine nodded, voice softening. "It sounds like a personal risk case I studied. When affection outruns principle, losses are the largest." I looked at her and smiled faintly. "You might make a better insurance advisor than me." When I returned home, a new envelope waited in the mailbox, postmarked Chicago. Inside was a letter from Bright. Horizon Investments, one line, notification of delinquent payment. Account listed under Melanie Sloan. I sat on the step, the paper trembling slightly in the breeze. Each word is cut thin. My daughter had borrowed to invest with Derek. I turned the page. There was Melanie's signature, hurried and jagged like someone panicking. Amount, $18,750. I sighed and looked toward the river. A light wind rustled the leaves like a whisper. I knew I couldn't save her by being soft. I thought of Derek, the man who always preached profit opportunities, yet had no real savings. If he dragged my daughter into this, there was filth behind it. I went inside, opened my laptop, and emailed Jonathan. New debt detected. $18,750 under Melanie Sloan. Please review the separating liability under Section 12 of the Georgia Property Code. I won't let them drag my share into the mud. 5 minutes later, he called. I just read it, Jonathan said. Good thing you caught it early. If we prove you didn't consent, the court can waive joint responsibility. But you must have clean evidence. I do. I keep all email logs and transaction confirmations. And one more thing. I want the source of Derek's money traced. You intend to hire an investigator? Yes. I have an old contact, a former risk assessor, Mark Keller. He helped me with insurance fraud cases. I'll call him now. That afternoon, I phoned Mark. His voice was still rough, half laughing. Harold, been years. Who am I digging into? Don't say a former client. No, my family. Silence, then a quiet reply. I understand. Send me everything. I'll start immediately. I hung up and opened the window. Late light fell across the wall where my old Top Regional Advisor 2004 plaque hung. I stared at it and muttered, maybe this time the one who needs advising is me. Night came with a misting rain. I sat at the desk and wrote in my journal. April 15th, partition in effect. New debt discovered. Contacted Keller to trace funds. The wind has shifted. The storm is about to strengthen. I closed the book, switched off the light, and looked out the window. Far off, thin lightning stitched the horizon, showing the Savannah River coiling in the wind. I knew, if Derek truly stood behind those loans, the coming storm would strip more than shingles. It would rip away his honor. That morning, the Savannah sky was a pale gray. Dew clung to the old oaks, and I drove slowly along a road I knew down to each brick. When I reached the corner of Cypress Lane, I stopped. The house now had a new fence, a for rent sign planted in the yard. Surely Derek had set up a little company to sublet it, trying to scrape together cash before the freeze order officially took effect. He still did not understand that the court had issued an order suspending all transactions and use of the property, that any act of renting, transferring, or pledging would be considered a violation of the ruling. I turned off the engine and sat quietly in the car, looking through glass fogged with mist. The old flower pots I'd helped Melanie plant had wilted, the half-painted porch still streaked with gray. In the yard, a few fresh tire tracks showed people had come to view the place. A strange feeling filled my chest, not just anger, but the sadness of a man watching something he once built being put up for rent like merchandise. I remembered every brick I laid, every board I painted when I helped my daughter and her husband prepare their first home. Now that for rent sign swung in the wind like a cruel declaration that the roof I had believed was our family's legacy was just a cash source for a debt addict. I took out my phone, snapped a photo of the sign and the broker's number, a new shell company registered as Turner Properties, LLC. I sent it to Mark Keller with a short message. Check who is on this listing. If it's Derek, we have proof of a court violation. 10 minutes later, Mark called back, his voice rough and clipped, like a man confirming what no one wants to believe. I guessed right, Harold. The listing went up this morning. The principal name is Derek Turner. He posted it using a business license opened last week. I'll immediately file a violation notice with the court. I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath. Ahead of me, the "For Rent" sign still trembled in the wind, sunlight cutting across each red letter like a gash. An SUV crawled past, the driver peering in, maybe a prospective renter. Everything before me suddenly felt foreign. The house that had been a symbol of love, of trust, was now just a line on a balance sheet, and the man who once called me father had turned it into a tool to pawn, to gamble, and now to rent. I started the engine and left without looking back. As I crossed the intersection, my phone buzzed. Mark's text. Filed notice with the judge's office. Copies will reach Attorney Evans tomorrow. Derek just violated the freeze order. This is our chance. I pressed my lips together and felt the anger fade, leaving only one thing: resolve. I no longer needed to prove to Melanie that I was right. Time and the law would do that. In 40 years of selling insurance, I had seen too many people lose everything for signing the wrong line, but I had never thought the one signing wrong would be my own son-in-law. I pressed the gas toward Attorney Benjamin Clark's office, where new papers were being prepared. In the rearview mirror, the "For Rent" sign shrank, like a stitched wound that still ached in my chest. 3 days later, Savannah fell under a light rain, each drop streaking down my windshield like time running backward. I sat in a small cafe near the courthouse where Mark had set our meeting. He stepped in with a wet coat, set a document, case on the table, and got straight to it. "Harold, I checked Turner Properties, LLC, the shell Derek used for the listing." I frowned. "Derek? He used his real name?" Mark nodded and pulled a photocopy of the business license from the case. "Yes, registered a few weeks ago. No permanent staff. Just a shell to legitimize transactions. And the Cypress Lane lease was signed under that name." I set my cup down slowly. "And Derek and Melanie?" Mark sighed. "They're out of that house. Derek told neighbors he's short-term renting for electrical repairs. In reality, they moved to a riverfront apartment near the marina. That unit is under Derek's company, and the rent gets written off as operating expense he invents." I was silent a few seconds. So he sold off even his pride for a place to hide. Mark's eyes tightened with caution. "Worse, he's using your house to launder cash, renting through the shell, pushing money into a side account, then draining it. It's a financial fraud pattern, and strengthens the case that this isn't just a family matter." I listened to the rain hammer the tin roof, coffee scent mixing with cold metal, the air heavy as lead. "You should know one more thing," Mark said softly. "Last night someone showed up around the apartment you're renting. Security said he stood outside the gate a few minutes, then left." I didn't ask more, only nodded. In insurance, I learned to read short warnings. That night I went back to the apartment, left the lights off, and sat by the window, looking over the lot washed in amber lamps. On the table lay the file I had flagged co-owned property violations. As I sorted the papers, my phone vibrated. A message appeared from an unsaved number, a single cold line. Insurance can't cover what's coming. I looked at the hidden number. Mark would trace the burner purchase tied to an alias, linked to Derek's account. No one needed to tell me it was an active threat. I deleted the text, screenshot it to Mark, and set the phone face down. The next morning I went to Attorney Evans' office. He stood at the window with a thick packet. "Harold," he said, "everything's ready. I'll file for a coercive order today. But I need you calm. If Derek retaliates, you cannot act on your own." I nodded. Evans set his pen down, signed a sheet, and spoke slowly in a heavy American drawl. "All financial institutions must immediately stop approving any loans, withdrawals, or refinancing involving this property without written consent from co-owner Harold Benton." I looked at him, my voice thick. "They won't stop." Evans answered, eyes hard. "I know, but the law is on your side now, and if they push further, we'll make everything blaze under the courtroom lights." I left his office, noon sun laying across the stone steps, and I understood this fight had crossed the line of family. It was no longer a matter between a father and a son-in-law. It was a fight between a man who lived by insurance signatures and those who treat every contract as a con. This time, I would be the one to place the final signature. 3 days after the enforcement order was signed, Mark Keller called me at 6 in the morning, his voice taut, unlike usual. "Harold, you should see this." I stood by the window, looking at a street dim with mist. He emailed a short video from the Cypress Lane security cameras. A pickup truck idled before my house near midnight. 2 men carried boxes out and drove off in the rain. Mark said, "This was the night the enforcement took effect. They moved so fast the neighbors thought it was an emergency. The tenant vanished. The house is empty." I gripped the phone. Derek told the manager they were repairing the place and would return after court. "But you know what I think?" Mark said, "He's waiting to see if you soften. If you falter, he'll sell or mortgage it through another shell." I was quiet a moment, my voice rough. "You're right. He hasn't quit." That afternoon we went to inspect the house. The newly painted fence still smelled of oil. The "For Rent" sign listing sideways in the wind. When we opened the door, a damp chill rushed out. The house is almost bare. The renter's big items are gone, but your original furnishings remain. The old dining set, the bookcase, and a few empty frames on the wall. Water rings still marked the dining table, as if they had just left in a hurry. I stood in the middle of the room, looking around. Each footstep echoed like a return from the past. I remembered every laid tile, each small nick on the stairs where Melanie had fallen as a child. Now everything was empty, cold and strange. Mark bent and picked up a crumpled paper from the floor. It was a power bill, the registered name, Turner Holdings, LLC. He sighed. "That's Derek's new company. He's pushing all costs here to dodge audits. Looks like he's backing out of the riverfront apartment, but still running the phantom accounts." I nodded. "So he's still using my asset to conceal the flow of money?" Mark nodded. "Yes, and worse, he's listed as an additional authorized signer on the business account. If financial crimes step in, this becomes clear evidence of a court order violation." I looked around and said slowly, "You know, Mark, men like Derek never stop. They think one more sidestep will slip past the law. But the law is like insurance. The more you try to hide, the higher the premium you pay." That night when I returned to the apartment, the rain had thickened. On the floor lay a nameless brown envelope slid under the door. Inside was a blurred photo of me walking out of Evans's office, my car's plate visible in the distance. Beneath it, scrawled in marker, "You're next, old man." I stared at the photo for a long time, then let out a quiet laugh. In the insurance business, I've met more than a few people who threaten when their policies are canceled. They think fear will make me yield, but they forget that when a man has lost everything, he has nothing left to fear. The next morning I went to see Evans. He was reading the copy of the lease contract Mark had found, his face stern. "I've sent this entire file to the court," he said. "If Derek makes a move, the police will intervene immediately. You should leave Savannah for a few days and let us handle it." I nodded. "I understand, but don't think I'm running. I just want them to see that justice is not a bargaining game." Evans gave a small, raspy smile. "I believe in you, Harold, and I believe this time the truth will stand with the most patient person." That evening I packed a few things and left the dark room, lit only by streetlight through the curtains. Before I walked out, I looked back once and thought that perhaps to get everything back, sometimes you have to leave the place that once belonged to you. I left Savannah on a morning with thin mist lying over the river. The car rolled along Highway 17 toward Beaufort, past rain-wet pines. Evans advised a short break, and Beaufort, with its slow rhythm and faint salt air, was the right place for silence. I rented a small bay cabin with a wooden porch and an old rocker. Each morning I brewed coffee, turned on the radio for brief news, then wrote down what had happened in the leather notebook I carried. At my age, writing is the only way to keep calm. 3 days later, Mark Keller called. "Harold, they're back." I stood up, hearing my heartbeat clearly. Who do you mean? Derek and Melanie? This morning they came to the Cypress Lane house with a locksmith, but the police had sealed the front door under the court order. All property in the house remains as is. The previous renter's belongings were removed, and your original furnishings are intact. I was silent a moment. Did they say anything? Derek raged, cursed, demanded to see you, and Melanie stood beside him, looking down, saying nothing. Mark sighed. But interestingly, after the police left, they stayed in the yard for nearly 2 hours, just staring through the window. Neighbors said she looked like she was crying. I leaned against the wooden wall, my breath heavy like smoke. That afternoon, Evans called with news. The court has granted a temporary freeze on the property until trial. We now have enough evidence to sue Derek for violating co-ownership and for illegal rental, used to launder money. He paused, his voice lower. I also just received copies of wire confirmations. He received more than $20,000 from a shell company he created, using a false name to bounce funds around, the day before the lease was signed. That is evidence of kickbacks and financial fraud. I heard his pen tap softly on the desk through the phone. Harold, you know what this means. If you permit, I'll ask the court to refer for criminal investigation. I looked out the window at the sea glittering with the gold of late afternoon. Do it, I said, as fast as possible. That afternoon, Mark sent me a photo, my door sealed with 2 red court stickers, beneath them a small sign reading, Under investigation, property frozen by court order. The image left me quiet. Part of me felt sad, because that house had once been the heart of the family. But another part, deeper, felt at peace, because at last justice had crossed that threshold, even if a little late. Night fell, and I sat on the porch, listening to waves against the rocks. Wind off the bay carried a cold salt smell. I recalled each face and conversation with my daughter. I wasn't angry at Melanie. I was angry at myself for failing to teach her the difference between ambition and integrity. In insurance, I had watched countless people lose everything for wanting just a little more. Derek was one of those. But the deepest pain was that my daughter believed him enough to trade away her father's name. Near midnight, my phone buzzed. Mark's number. Harold, I just got new intel. Derek is meeting with his own attorney and looks ready to countersue, claiming you coerced him financially and trespassed on personal property. Evans is drafting a response. I gave a small smile, my voice roughened by the wind. Let him try. In insurance, we call that moral hazard, when the cheat thinks he can escape without paying. Mark was quiet a few seconds, then asked slowly, Aren't you afraid? No, I said. I'm only afraid of living long enough to watch them believe money matters more than honor. When I hung up, town lights shimmered on the water. I sat there alone, but I no longer felt lonely. In the dark, I knew the fight had shifted. No longer a kitchen standoff, but a battle of paperwork, seals, and truth. And I knew that if I stayed calm, I would win. That morning, the Duval County Courthouse was unusually crowded. On the steps, March sun poured over glass that reflected rows of palms. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying the brown case I had prepared through the night. Inside were printed transaction emails, account statements, and the screenshots I had saved from the bank systems before Derek tried to erase the trail. The house at 2198 Brookdale Drive remained sealed. The renter moved out right after the notice from the sheriff's office. All co-owned properties stayed intact by court order, and the last month's rent was placed in escrow pending judgment. Courtroom number 3 was wide with a high ceiling, the smell of fresh varnish and the click of leather soles on tile drawn tight as a string. Derek sat at the defense table in a gray suit with a loose tie, trying to look calm while his gaze slipped away. Beside him, Melanie, my daughter, kept her head down, blonde hair pinned in haste, hands crushing a wrinkled tissue. She looked thinner, tired, and still silent. My lawyer, Benjamin Clark, a man around 50 with salt and pepper hair, put a hand on my shoulder. "Steady, Harold. The evidence is clear." He had been a prosecutor before opening his firm in St. Augustine, known for being solid and never wasting a word. When Judge Deborah Simmons entered, everyone rose. She wore a black robe, her eyes stern but not cold, the kind that had seen 100 family breakages. "Benton v. Benton and Turner," the clerk called, voice ringing. "Subject to asset fraud and breach of co-ownership agreement." Benjamin began in a low voice. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Harold Benton, is the lawful co-owner of 2198 Brookdale Drive, and found that the co-signer, Ms. Melanie Benton Turner, and her husband used the asset to secure personal debts without his consent." He set the stack of files down. "We request confirmation of control and permission to seize in order to protect the plaintiff's lawful equity." Opposing counsel, a young man named Scott Avery, smirked. "Your Honor, defendants admit confusion in the lending process, but Mr. Benton's enforcement filing is excessive, more a personal vendetta than a financial remedy. He is just punishing his daughter." Derek flicked a glance at me, half defiance, half fear. Judge Simmons nodded for us to continue. Benjamin calmly opened the folder. "Please see Exhibit A, statements confirming $53,000 in online betting debt. And Exhibit B, the secondary mortgage agreement bearing a forged signature of the plaintiff." Both documents were signature verified by the bank through independent examination. The room stirred. Melanie looked up, eyes wide. Scott offered a weak objection. "Evidence improperly obtained," and Benjamin replied, "Produced by the bank under court order, fully compliant." The judge nodded. "Objection overruled." Derek bit his lip, a bead of sweat sliding down his neck. I felt no joy, only the long emptiness of fatherhood. Judge Simmons turned to me. "Mr. Benton, would you like to speak?" I stood, my voice rough with strain but steady. "Your Honor, I have worked in insurance for more than 30 years. I understand the value of commitments and numbers. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to protect a lifetime's work and to remind my daughter that trust is not something you can stack on top of debt." The judge regarded me for a long moment and nodded. "Entered into the record." The hearing ran nearly 2 hours. At the end, Donald Pierce, the branch director at Suncoast Bank, was called. He detailed the verification protocol and how Derek submitted the second lien application through his personal account with a scanned forged signature. When the system flagged an information match, we called Mr. Benton for confirmation. "Thanks to that, the act was discovered," Evans said, looking toward me with sympathy. Scott pushed back weakly. "An employee could have made a mistake." Evans shook his head. I reviewed the cameras. Mr. Turner handed the file in himself. The room fell silent. When the judge's gavel struck, Simmons declared, "The court hereby orders a temporary freeze on all transactions related to the property at 2198 Brookdale Drive until this case is resolved. No party may sell, lease, or transfer in any form. The next hearing is set for March 27th. Melanie burst into tears. Derek lowered his head, face flushing. I sat still with my hands interlaced. Benjamin murmured, "It's only the first step, but the court has recognized your rights." As we left, a light rain began, beads clinging to the stone steps. Through the glass, I saw Derek, pulling Melanie quickly toward the parking lot without looking back. In the car, Benjamin said, "We won the opening round, but he won't let go easily. Be ready, Harold. If he's desperate, he'll try to slip through cracks." I nodded, watching the rain streak across the window. "Thank you, Ben. From now on, I don't want to talk about debt. I only want to talk about boundaries." Outside, clouds thickened. Inside, I felt myself seated on the knife edge between justice and pain, where a father must use the law to teach his daughter what love could not. 3 days after the hearing, the name Harold Benton began appearing on local forums and small Savannah news sites. Anonymous posts, all in the same voice, painted me as A stubborn father suing his daughter to seize a house, while Derek was cast as a young husband insulted by the old generation's control. At first I scrolled past, assuming tabloid chasers, angling for cheap clicks. But by the third day, everything changed. A short video spread online of Derek standing in front of the Cypress Lane house, speaking in a trembling voice. "I only want to protect my wife and our child from rigid decisions. Her father took all of our family's money." His words punched out, eyes reddened, voice breaking, a perfect performance for those who didn't know the truth. I sat in the apartment living room and watched it on repeat, each second a thin blade slicing what pride I had left. Mark called, right after. "See it? He's trying to cast you as the villain." I gave a small laugh. "I sold insurance for 30 years, Mark. I understand how people monetize fear. Now he's selling pity." That afternoon, Benjamin emailed. "We're seeing signs of a coordinated media push. Several posts were uploaded from the same IP address, the city where Derek lives." I replied simply, "Good. Collect and preserve." 2 days later, we met at Evans's office in Jacksonville. Mark brought a laptop and pulled up the digital trail. Every post traced to a secondary account called Turner Family Justice, uploaded on the riverfront, apartment's Wi-Fi. Benjamin's voice dropped. He made a big mistake. This so-called compassion campaign can be treated as public manipulation pre-trial. Evans added, "I've submitted the fake statements and shell account transfers to the FBI. If confirmed, this leaves the civil lane." I leaned back and breathed deep. Late in the day, as I left the office, I saw Melanie across the street. She wore a gray coat, holding a small envelope, eyes rimmed red. I stepped forward, but she backed away. "Dad," she said softly, voice shaking. "I didn't know it would go this far. I wanted him to stop, but every time I spoke up, he exploded." I looked at my daughter and saw real fear, not arrogance. I said quietly, "Melanie, you can still stop. The court doesn't hate you, and neither do I. But if you stay silent, he'll drag you down with him." She nodded, tears spilling. "I know. I'll do what's right." Then she turned and hurried to the lot. I stood there with the cold wind at my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt a true sliver of hope, not for me, but for my child. That night I wrote in my journal, March 19th, the liar begins to fear the truth. That morning the Duval County Courthouse gleamed under March sunlight. The rays bounced off polished brown wood in the courtroom, stretching the silence taut. I arrived 15 minutes early, case in hand, and noticed 3 men in dark suits on the back bench, with federal badges on their chests. Benjamin murmured, "The FBI is in, Harold. They suspect Derek used the house to launder rent through the lease." I only nodded. After months of storms, justice finally had a shape. When Judge Simmons entered, all rose. Derek sat at the defense table, tie crooked, face cold while his hands trembled. Beside him, Melanie stepped in, wearing a gray coat, holding a thick envelope. My daughter's eyes no longer dodged. They were steady, clear, like someone who had crossed a ravine and seen the far bank. "Your Honor," she said, voice shaky but firm, "I have supplemental evidence for consideration." Benjamin stood and passed the envelope to the clerk. Inside were statements, wire slips, and a small USB. Judge Simmons asked, "Where did you obtain these materials?" Melanie drew a breath, her voice cracking, but each word sharp as a blade. "I'm the one who recorded my husband. The call took place the night of March 14th. He spoke with a broker named Wade Collins, who helped him open a side account to wash rent into clean funds. I was in the room. I recorded it and saved the statements before he deleted them." The judge nodded to play the audio. Derek's voice came through unmistakably. "Just push it through Horizon like before. Rent's legit. Nobody touches it. Old man Benton just needs a signature copy. He'll never spot it." The sound stopped, and the air froze. An FBI agent bent over his notes. Derek shot up, slammed his hand on the table, and shouted, "What are you doing, Melanie? Betraying me? Selling out this family to please him?" Melanie turned, tears spilling, but voice steady now. No, Derek, I'm betraying the lies I lived with, and I have to do it. She set a hand on her belly, tears running. I'm carrying our first child. The room went still. He stood stunned. I gripped the chair. This baby woke me up. I won't let it grow up where lies are normal. I won't have our child learn fear or bow to our sins. When I was little, my father taught me that honesty is the one thing you can't lose. I forgot that when I took your side, when I let money blind me, but now I understand. Becoming a mother lets me understand a father's heart, and I won't let our child repeat my mistake. The words seemed to suspend the room. Derek stepped back, face drained, mouth opening without sound. An agent rose, conferred briefly with Benjamin, then approached the bench. Judge Simmons tapped her gavel, voice even. The court rules that the property at 2198 Brookdale Drive is awarded to Mr. Harold Benton as sole owner. All acts of forgery, conversion, and money laundering connected to this property are referred to federal authorities. 2 FBI agents stepped forward and read the emergency arrest warrant. Derek turned to Melanie, voice ragged. You've hurt our child, she answered, tears falling but gaze unwavering. No, I'm saving our child from growing up with a father like you. He was cuffed and led away, and the courtroom was left with heavy, exhausted breaths. I sat and looked at my daughter and saw at last what I had longed for. True awakening. When the room cleared, Melanie came to me, hands trembling as she gripped mine. Dad, I'm sorry. I listened to that recording dozens of times before giving it to Mark. Each time I heard his laugh, I watched the little girl you taught to be honest disappear. I want her back. I set a hand on her shoulder, my voice low but warm. And you found her today. She nodded and hugged me hard, crying and laughing, her belly rising and falling with each breath. That afternoon I returned to Cypress Lane. The seals had been removed, the house stood open, sunlight flashing across the bright wood floors. On the table lay an FBI envelope. Property cleared, investigation ongoing. Beside it, a small note in Melanie's hand. Dad, I'm starting over for the child on the way. I folded the note into my wallet, sat in the old porch chair, poured coffee, and watched the Savannah River mirror the red evening sky. The American flag in the yard lifted softly in the wind. I smiled and whispered, Eleanor, I kept our house. In that light, I knew justice may come late, but when it arrives, it is strong enough to illuminate the darkest corners of the human heart. And that is how a father reclaims justice without shouting, by patience and by trusting that. Truth knows how to walk into the light. The house on Cypress Lane now belongs to the right person, and my daughter finally understands what I taught her. Money can buy back many things, but not honor. I did not win because the court ruled for me, but because for the first time in years, I saw my child look at me without avoidance. She looked with understanding. If you believe that justice is not revenge, but the final lesson of a father's love, hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and share this story so others know that no matter the betrayal, honesty remains the most precious legacy a father can leave his child. Leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Thank you for being here, for believing that justice and a father's love still have a place in this world. I treasure every second you spent hearing my story.